Hi, everyone. Welcome to our What is Archaeology lecture, providing background for students in University of Montana's Anthropology 150, Archaeology of Yellowstone. So this just provides students in Anthropology 150, the Archaeology of Yellowstone, with a little more background in terms of what archaeology is. I know many of you have never taken classes in anthropology or even archaeology. And so this section of the lecture just provides you with some insight into archaeology and some of the terms I'll be using over the course of the semester. So archaeology is one of the four subfields of anthropology. Anthropology really can be considered just the study of people from a lot of different perspectives. There's four subfields within anthropology. So, for example, our Department of Anthropology here at the University of Montana has four subfields. Archaeology is one of those. It's defined as the study of the human past via its material remains. There's also cultural anthropology, which is the study of modern people, biological anthropology, which is the study of the physical attributes and the evolution of people. And then there's the study of linguistics, which is the study of the human language. And so we have 14 faculty here at the University of Montana Department of Anthropology that study these varieties of anthropology. So archaeology is one of the subfields. It's the study of the past via material remains. I'll talk about what I mean by that in today's lecture. So material remains is just like artifacts and features and things like that that we find at archaeological sites. There's two types of archaeology in the United States. One is called prehistoric or pre-contact archaeology, and that's basically the study of archaeology of places before the written record, as opposed to historic archaeology, which is the archaeology of places after the written record. And when we're studying Native Americans in Yellowstone and Native American archaeology, I'd say most of it encompasses pre-contact or prehistoric archaeology, but certainly there's a lot of archaeological remains in Yellowstone associated with tribes during the historic period as well. So Native American archaeology actually overlaps both types of prehistoric and historic archaeology. An archaeological site is a place where humans lived in the past. And so when I'm out in Yellowstone, I'm looking for archaeological sites. That's going to help me understand human behavior in the past. So historic sites in Yellowstone date to after the 1820s and are associated with European Americans. Prehistoric or pre-contact sites in Yellowstone are places where Native Americans lived in the past. And so the age range for those Native American sites is approximately 11,000 to 200 years ago. So how do archaeologists find sites? We do it by archaeological survey. That's a method by which archaeologists locate places where humans lived in the past. And there's basically two types of archaeological survey. One is pedestrian survey, which is, or surface survey, which is systematic walking of the ground surface of an area, looking for signs of human occupation like artifacts or features. And then there's also shovel test pit survey, which is the systematic excavation of holes in an area to identify signs of human occupation. We've tried to find archaeological sites using both methods in Yellowstone. There's a variety of types of archaeological study in Yellowstone. The two basic ones, one is academic archaeology, and that's archaeological work conducted by academic institutions for purely research purposes to answer big questions about the past. And then there's cultural resource management archaeology, which is the archaeology conducted by the federal government prior to construction or to identify archaeological sites in areas of importance for environmental planning. The cultural resource management archaeology part of it is funded by the federal government by law via the National Historic Preservation Act, which requires federal agencies to take into consideration the effects of their projects on things like archaeological sites. So what types of prehistoric Native American sites are found in Yellowstone? There's 6 key Yellowstone prehistoric site types in Yellowstone. We're going to focus on the prehistoric site types for the most of the class, and so that's what I'll focus on in today's lecture. We have camps, which are the most common type of site. That's a small type of site, usually associated with a small group of people for a short duration. So a group of hunter-gatherers on the landscape for a couple days, spending one or two nights at a camp. A village, a larger type of site comprised of larger group of people for a longer duration. Kill sites, this is a location where hunter-gatherers killed and butchered animals. A quarry or a procurement site is a location where hunter-gatherers collected an important raw material. A religious site could be a location of spiritual importance, typically involving construction of a fasting bed or cairn. And then there's rock art, a location where an image has been pecked or painted on a rock wall or surface. Campsites are the most common type of site, and you find these in a lot of different locations in and around Yellowstone. The picture on the left is a photograph of an archaeological camp at Yellowstone Lake, a place where Native Americans lived for thousands of years. On the right is a famous archaeological site called Mummy Cave, just outside the eastern entrance to Yellowstone National Park. Also a location where Native Americans camped repeatedly along the Shoshone River. That's a type of rock shelter. So we have both open camps, like the site on the left at Yellowstone Lake, as well as rock shelters, as you can see on the right. Village sites are a little more rare. You most often find village sites in places like the Missouri River Valley, where agricultural villages were established starting about 1,500 years ago or so. In Yellowstone, the most common types of village sites are high elevation sites associated with procurement of specific types of abundant materials or plants or animals. And so the picture on the right is a photograph of an archaeological site in the Wind River Mountains of northwestern Wyoming called High Rise Village. And this is a big village where dozens, if not hundreds, of Native Americans lived while they were procuring white bark pine nuts. Kill sites are open kill sites, such as the Windy Bison site at Yellowstone Lake on the left, and the Colby Mammoth kill site over by Worland, Wyoming on the right. And so these are places where Native American hunted animals in open areas in order to gather food for to make a living. Another type of kill site is a game jump or a game drive, and this is a specific way that Native Americans would herd animals into specific locations, excuse me, and then kill those animals en masse. So on the left, you have a game drive on a butte near Gardner, Montana, where animals were driven up that slope onto the top of the ridge and then hunted. On the right, you have a famous Montana buffalo jump called Madison Buffalo Jump over by Three Forks, where animals were driven over the top of the jump, and then they were killed along the slopes below the jump area. You also have ice patches. These were great places for hunters to ambush animals in the summer. There's all kinds of animals that like to herd around ice patches or snow patches in the hot summer months because they're just good places to hang out. This is a photograph of a famous Yellowstone archaeologist named Craig Lee up in the Absaroka Mountains near Yellowstone National Park. There's also quarry and procurement sites, and the most famous one of those quarry or procurement sites in Yellowstone is Obsidian Cliff. That's in the northwestern part of the park. This picture on the left was taken during an archaeological survey in 1988-89, where they're looking around for debris from the production of obsidian tools at Obsidian Cliff. Religious sites are also fairly common in Yellowstone. They're usually at higher elevation locations. We'll talk about this a lot more when we get into the mountains section of the class. This is a picture on the left is a picture by Aaron Bryn of a fasting bed in the Pryor Mountains east of Yellowstone National Park. And then on the right is a cairn on a hilltop near Gardner, Montana. Cairns and fasting beds are common markers for Native American religious prayer sites. Then there's rock art sites, and there aren't a lot of those in Yellowstone National Park. In fact, over the course of the semester, I'll talk about only one rock art site, and that's one that we found a couple summers ago in Yellowstone National Park. But there's a lot of rock art sites in and around the perimeters of Yellowstone, and so we'll talk about some of those as we get into especially the hot springs section of the class, as well as the mountain section of the class where the rock art is commonly located. There's two really big rock art sites that are shown here in this image. One is Bear Gulch near Lewistown, Montana on the left, and then this is a picture of a petroglyph site at Legend Rock down in Wyoming, just southwest of Yellowstone National Park. So what do archaeologists find at prehistoric sites in Yellowstone? We find a lot of different types of artifacts: stone tools, groundstone tools, pottery and soapstone vessels, faunal remains, and human remains. We also find lots of features, and these are evidence of specific activities that happened in the past, such as human burials or stone circles or teepee rings, house structures, fire pits or hearths, quarry pits or trenches, tool production features, food production features, refuse disposal features, and those cairns like the religious features that I showed you in the slides before. So in terms of different types of artifacts in Yellowstone, we find a lot of varieties of artifacts. These are material remains of human activities. And over the next several slides, I'll go through and give you some photographs of examples of these different types of tools that you see here. So stone tools are tools produced from high quality stone. They're used as tips to hunting implements like arrows. Skilled flint knappers would collect very good stone at places like Obsidian Cliff to make stone tools. Those skilled flint knappers would make the stone tools like you can see in these photos, and then they would use them in their daily lives. Groundstone tools were often used to grind food, so that could either be plant materials or meat materials, just to make it into pastes, for example, or into smaller bits of food that more edible. Pottery and soapstone vessels are not all that common in Yellowstone, simply because hunter-gatherers didn't like to transport big, heavy pots around with them, but we do find them sometimes. And so occasionally you'll find artifacts associated with pottery and soapstone vessels, which Native Americans used to store food, as well as to boil and cook foods. Fauna remains are simply the evidence of bone left over from the butchering of animals at archaeological sites. Human remains are very rare. There's only been a few sets of human remains found in Yellowstone. Our University of Montana teams have never found any evidence of human remains on our projects in Yellowstone. One of the more famous ones near Yellowstone was this at Mummy Cave, just east of the park. And this was on display at the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody for years until they removed them out of respect for the Native American tribes of the area. Textiles are also common in some of the dry rock shelters like Mummy Cave. Cordage and basket fragments, such as the ones on the right, are well preserved in dry caves and rock shelters in Yellowstone. We also find lots of evidence of wood and charcoal. The photograph on the left is a nice evidence of a charcoal band on an island in the middle of Yellowstone Lake. And on the right are wood fragments, again, from a rock shelter that preserves those organic materials well. Soils often provide evidence of the types of plants that were being eaten by Native Americans as well, and we often find those as plant and pollen remains. There's also lots of different types of features found at Yellowstone archaeological sites, and I'll run through some of those here. Human burials, again, very uncommon in Yellowstone. The picture on the right is of a site in South Dakota that was excavated many years ago of a massacre of Native Americans, about 500 years old. Human remains are not common, so human burials themselves are not all that common in Yellowstone National Park. Stone circles, these are evidence of teepees. They're much more common. This is a photograph of a site near Gardner, Montana, with stone circles. House structures is a type of teepee structure, obviously, but there's also wiki-ups, such as the photograph in the center here, as well as stone structures, such as the one at High Rise Village on the left. Fire pits and hearths are the most common type of feature that we find in Yellowstone, and those are really useful because we can use the evidence from those to provide dates of occupation of archaeological sites. Quarry pits and trenches are often found at stone production procurement sites, and we find those occasionally at some of the bigger quarries like Obsidian Cliff. On the right, you'll see a picture of a quarry trench at Cougar Creek Obsidian site in Yellowstone. Stone tool production features are all over in Yellowstone because it was an important activity for Native Americans. Food production features like the making of pemmican, which is a type of beef jerky-like food that Native American hunter-gatherers used a lot in Yellowstone, but also all across the Great Plains. Refuse disposal features are common. Native Americans would clean up their houses and get rid of the debris just like we do today, and we'll often find pits or just open areas where this food was disposed of, such as this photograph on the right taken by Professor Anna Prentice from the University of Montana at her archaeological site in British Columbia. Religious features, like I've shown you before, I showed you these pictures earlier, but these are cairns and fasting beds. These are the types of features we find at those religious sites. Drive lines and hunting blinds are common in Yellowstone. These are evidence that Native Americans were using pretty sophisticated techniques to hunt animals in Yellowstone National Park. And there's lots of different types of excavation and methodologies in archaeology that we use, from shovel test pit excavation, to test pit excavation. We'll use electronic imaging to help us understand what's beneath the ground. And then we use fancy, sophisticated site technology to map the sites. Lots of different types of methods of analysis. These are all examples. And the goal of Yellowstone archaeological research is really to learn about the past lives of Native American people in Yellowstone, where they lived, how they lived, where they traveled, the types of tools they used, the types of animals and plants that they hunted and gathered, as well as their religious aspects of their lives. So we're really trying to learn about the lives of Native American hunter-gatherers that lived in Yellowstone and the surrounding areas within the greater Yellowstone ecosystem.